Good morning. I'm Fred Fisher, and joining in a conversation today with the partnership of Fred Fisher and Partners, Joe Coriaty and David Ross, who have been working together with me for over 30 years. And now Matt Kelley, Marisa Kurtzman, Nathan Prevendar, and Takashige Ikawa are joining us as what we refer to as the next generation. I would want to say something about a partnership to begin with. I would say it's the most important decision and process that I've engaged in my career. And I simply couldn't have had the career and the practice that we have together without Joe and David, and now without Matt and Taka and Marisa and Nathan. And so it's the single most important engagement that I've made in my career. And I see this as in a way, the next step, the next necessary step as the generations, time passes and the generations change, that in order to have a legacy firm, that you need to rebuild and establish a new generation of leaders. And that is not a process that we took lightly. It took a number of years. And in some ways, it is a process whereby the leaders maybe not even consciously bring themselves forward and make it apparent who the next generation of leaders are. And one of the things that I've always appreciated about our partnership, David and Joe and myself, is the unique chemistry that three of us are very different. And yet there's been this, I think, marvelous balance, which has given us great success between how different we are and what each one of us brings into the conversations that we've had. And we certainly don't always agree. And yet we share some very solid common values and a commitment to each other and to our shared profession, of which we all honor very highly. I've always felt very fortunate to be an architect and to be able to have a practice. And the only way that you can do that is having the right people around you. So with that, maybe I'd like each one of you to maybe talk a bit about yourself and what brought you into the practice. And Matt, I'm looking at you on the screen, so why don't you start?
A bit about ourselves. So the background stuff, I don't know if I should go back. It asks where you grew up, so I'm wondering if that's kind of a thing we do or not. It's a bit.
Well, David, it's one of the things, in a way, that David and Joe and I have actually always talked about as not being insignificant, is the fact that we're all Midwesterners. And that is there's a value set and a set of worldviews that come out of that I think have grounds our practice in a certain way. So you all are different, and I think that where one comes from actually does have something to do with.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I grew up in Maine, which is I think did influence for sure kind of my perspective on architecture and kind of, I don't know, work in general. And I think that certainly growing up there made me kind of have a connection to architecture's relationship to landscape for sure. So I think that's really the first kernels I can think of that inspired me to become an architect. Didn't really have family background in architecture like Fred did. And so it wasn't inevitable for me to become an architect. It took a while for that to develop. I was also fairly technical. I started in engineering school when I went off to college, but always with this thought in mind that I wanted to kind of blend back into the arts in some way. And that after a couple of years, that became really obvious that I would kind of pursue architecture and, you know, get out of the technical side of engineering, which was a nice balance. I came to the practice, you know, I stayed on the East Coast for college, but then decided to come to California for grad school, and went to SciArc, and that's really where I started to hear a lot about Fred Fisher and Partners, and all the firms, all the Southern California firms. I didn't know too much about Fred's office before that, but I really got interests. I would say maybe Houston, Santa Monica was the first project I was aware of at that time. And as I started to look for internships after my first year at SciArc, Fred was recommended by a professor. So that started my journey. I don't remember my first day at the office. That was so long ago at this point. But yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I think it was an even smaller office back then. And one of the great qualities of the office is how much of a family it feels like, kind of working in a mid-century house. And that really kept me coming back for more. The people were great that were there at the time, good mentors. And so, yeah, I felt appreciated right away as a young designer, and I still feel that way today. And is that enough for me?
Marisa?
Well, I'm a fourth generation native Californian. I grew up in Santa Monica, where I live today, which would make you think that I've never gone anywhere. But in fact, actually, I traveled and lived in a lot of countries, starting at a very young age, starting at age 4. My family lived in Mexico. And then subsequent to that, I lived in Switzerland and Spain and France. And then I moved all over the country for college and for graduate school and after. So I kind of joke. People always say that I'm the least Californian you've ever met. But after a long time away, I was finishing graduate school, and my sister-in-law was pregnant with my nephew, and my parents weren't getting any younger, and so I decided to give it a shot and come back to Los Angeles and see whether maybe both of us had grown up a little bit. And in fact, we had. So I came to FF&P right after graduate school. I don't really remember how I came about it, other than I think I had a list of top 20 firms in Los Angeles, and started digging around, looking at websites, and the work impressed me. I knew a lot of it because so much of it was local to my own life and my own childhood. At the time when I started, FF&P was working on the Annenberg Beach House, which was actually where I learned to swim. So there was always this kind of personal quality to working at the office. And I don't really remember my first day, other than that, having come from working on the East Coast, I think I was overdressed. But I do remember that during the process of actually interviewing, one thing that really struck me was how, in an industry known for a lot of ego, everybody I talked to seemed just like a fundamentally very decent person and fairly low key and kind of Californian, ironically. So, since I'm actually about to celebrate my 14th anniversary as an employee of FF&P, and I've never looked back. It's been a great fit for me. I think the combination of camaraderie and creativity and left and right brain has been terrific. As far as getting into architecture, I came to it quite late. I actually was, as Fred likes to say, a liberal arts person. I studied art history in college. I always liked to draw and play with Legos, but I never really considered architecture until after finishing school and looking for work in museum, I wanted to be a museum curator, and quickly realized there were about 5 museum curator positions available at any given time in the entire world. So that didn't seem terribly practical. Plus, I wasn't very excited about getting a PhD. And so I was living in Boston, and I lived near Harvard. And I believe that the former tenants in my apartment building had been students at the Graduate School of Design, because we got a lot of architecture-related mail for them. And one day I came home in the spring, after this sort of year of pondering what I was going to do with myself, and there was a large envelope in my mailbox, not addressed to me, from the Boston Society of Architecture. So I opened it on a whim, and inside was a flyer for Harvard's summer program at the Graduate School of Design, which is called Career Discovery. And I was looking to discover a career at that time. So I quit my job and did that, and the rest is history. So, crime, which, I always joke that opening somebody else's mail is technically a felony, but crime pays. It doesn't pay a lot in my case, but it, pays a little.
Nathan?
Yeah. So I guess I'm probably one of the rarer ones. Architecture was something that got introduced to me really quite early, and I knew early in my life that this was something I wanted to pursue. I actually was born in Washington State, but grew up in northern Minnesota, so I have, quote unquote, that Midwest upbringing and sensibility, as the practice has. But I grew up in kind of an environment of the do-it-yourself type. My family did pretty much everything from literally trenching sewer lines, electrical lines, to building buildings, to making quilts, to making rugs, really just pretty much everything we were kind of doing ourselves, just because that was the upbringing my parents had, with kind of my mom's side with her Native American upbringing, and my father's side kind of with the greatest generation upbringing, the World War II era kind of families, where you really did need to do everything yourself. So because of that, I was exposed to building, to what goes into buildings, and thinking about, the creation of something. And I was also, just like many of the rest of us, really deeply interested in the arts. I was practicing the arts, and then started seeing, hey, these two things kind of actually merge together. So in high school, I actually shadowed an architect. I did a summer study program. And so knew really that this was the thing I wanted to kind of get engaged in, since it had the arts, but it also had the creation of something. So you could stand back and look and say, I was part of that, which it's pretty amazing that this field offers that to the community. So it's not just for one person, but it's really giving something back. Then my family moved to Central California my senior year of high school. So it was kind of a huge, amazing change from the small town in Minnesota to a larger town. And then, day one in Los Angeles was literally starting undergraduate studies in architecture. So it was kind of this wild shift of scale. And through that, that's how I actually got introduced to Frederick Fisher and Partners. Actually, it was first and second year design studio. We did a precedent study on the building that we're actually inhabiting. It's A. Quincy Jones building. And so we studied it, came and toured it. We had to hand draw on Mylar drawings of the building, and then make partie models of this building. So it's pretty amazing. And then actually fast forward a couple more years, completely forgot about Frederick Fisher and Partners until a professor of mine had been working here at the time and mentioned, hey, we're hiring, would you be interested in coming by for an interview? And I said, oh, that sounds great. So I was lucky enough to be interviewed by David Ross, and clearly things went pretty good. He toured me around the building, and at that time I didn't have the heart to tell him that I actually knew quite a bit about the building, which was kind of funny. So we kept my mouth shut. So I figured things are going good. So don't want to tip things. So it was just kind of saw right away, wow, it's an amazing group of people, amazing fit. You could see the building and see how the building came together. And as I mentioned, the do-it-yourself that interest of mine, being the Renaissance person, it just like everything kind of clicked into place. And unlike some of the other, my new partners, I actually remember the first week, not really the first day here, but it was kind of that first week. Because day one, my chair broke and it kind of took a week to get a new chair. So kind of bouncing around the studio. And then also, you know, my computer didn't quite work, so I had to bring in my laptop. So there's these kind of all these little moments that you kind of realize, okay, they're trying to help, but this is kind of just a comedy of errors. And then also, I started on two amazing projects. One which was completed, and the other, unfortunately, we just got through design development on. But it was day one. Immediately, Joe and David kind of threw me into the deep end on the design charrette for the Oberlin student housing. So I was working with Matt in envisioning what that could be. And at the same time, we were working on a private residence for the owner of the Hillstone, Houston's restaurant chain. And to hear that this individual wanted to live inside a cabinet was such an amazing idea, and thinking about craft and how things come together, that, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't have picked a better place to really, you know, be here. So hence, you know, as Marisa said, fast forward 14, 15 years and haven't looked back since.
I grew up in Hokkaido, Japan, where is northern island and relatively rural area of Japan. My mom still is a calligrapher. I was exposed to her art making, Japanese calligraphy painting from when I was very young. And then I was always watching that, how those art is created. And when I grew up, I became her critique, and then she always asked my opinion. So I've been always kind of exposed to that kind of environment. That kind of quite a bit affected direction of my future. Then maybe first time I'm interested in architecture was when I was like 5 or 6 or 7. My dad got a house built, and I was watching during the construction always. Every day I was watching how people make the building, and I was quite interested in making such a large object. That is the kind of first interest. And when I graduated elementary school, the booklet school issued what I want to be in the future. I put a architectural designer at that point. That was the kind of early stage I was interested. Then I went to a little different area for high school, and that area is kind of, Japan opened a port to Western culture very early, and a lot of beautiful churches are there. So I was looking around those things, and I was very impressed by how architecture can move people's heart. So that is when I was a high school student, I was kind of struggling becoming a fashion designer versus architect. I was really thinking between, but eventually architecture interested me more. So that is the point I decided to become an architectural designer. Then when I was a college student, I studied in Japan as well as London. I was exposed to a lot of amazing architecture in Europe. I was traveling around Europe and then inspired by so many architecture when I was college. Then I worked a little bit and I designed my parents' house and then some other houses after I graduated. Then I thought, what is missing? I haven't seen America. Maybe I should see America. Then I traveled this country and looked around Frank Lloyd Wright and many great architecture in this country. And I decided to come to graduate school to this country. And I picked SciArc. That's how I started living in this country. Then I decided to study graduate school architecture, but at the same time, I want to do some supplemental art experience. Then I studied photography. So photography is my supplemental artwork. I kind of seriously took it and studied and a little bit worked as professionally. Then my professor at SciArc was actually used to be teacher for Fred, and that was a connection to the office. I was introduced by my professor to the office. I visited and I introduced to Fred, and after a while, when I was graduating and decided to interview here. That was the kind of first engagement to the office with Fred. And so what I liked about this office is timeless character of the architecture in this office. That's kind of, I always, my actually thesis at SciArc was about how architecture can affect people's feeling experience, but at the same time, not the fast communication, more slower communication, which people experience deeper again by spending time. That is, in a way, it's a timelessness. So, first information, if the information first, you catch first, but you consume first. I'm more interested in communication with design, spending time and understanding deeper, and then that is becoming part of your lifetime experience. So that's what I'm interested about this office, and I'm very much enjoying working in this office and designing architecture here. And then besides that, what I like about the office is people. People in this office is really friendly, amazing, and open-minded. That's how I have been here and enjoying keep working here.
Thanks, Taka. David, do you want to ask a question?
I guess my question for everyone would be, all of you have been here for quite a while, and I think all of you, we are friendly, we're all getting along, we're a family. And I'd be curious for each one of you as Next Gen, just what are your concerns? What are your hopes, dreams, and desires for the future, for the firm and for each one of you?
So what do I think about as far as well, I mean, obviously I think, there's this kind of, to quote Spider-Man's uncle, with power comes responsibility. So I do feel a tremendous amount of responsibility to further this practice from the sense of business and to keep it, it's been here for 40 years. And that is a huge honor to be asked to help continue that. And I hope that we can continue that for another 40 years. But also the legacy of great design and an excellent camaraderie and firm culture that has been sort of become fundamental to the practice. I want to further that. As far as what I sort of personally feel responsible for, I mean, so my focus within the practice is the front end of the practice. So everything from marketing to visioning, programming, and planning. And that's really about creating and cementing client relationships. So I always focus on who we're working with and the communities that we're working with. And it's really important, I think, especially in this day and age, that we work with people who aren't, you know, just walking in the door with a checkbook, but people whose hearts are in the right place and who are creating spaces that are going to do good in the world and benefit humanity in some capacity. So finding, you know, the great clients that we've continued to work with this whole time and keeping that going is really important. I think in terms of reflecting that community, I think we also really need to look at the practice of architecture as a practice that has not been as inclusive or as equitable as it needs to be. Our office is not unusual in that, you know, I think we are all very family oriented, and there is a great sense of camaraderie, but there need to be more seats at the table, and not just seats, but, you know, seats of equal height. And so I think as the sole woman in this partnership, that's always been a priority for me to help pay it forward, to bring up other women and maybe other voices that might not necessarily be represented in the sort of traditional canon of architecture. So that's something that I'm interested in right now as well. And then, of course, you know, the legacy of design. If we don't have the great work, then we don't have a practice.
My interest and for the future, we have a great legacy, and we have a great tradition in this office. It's quite well established. But at the same time, design field is ever evolving field. As I said, I love the nature of timelessness, but at the same time, how we can be always current and the future. So I'm conscious about what is happening to the world, design world, and overall globally, what is happening, be sensitive and think about the future and reflecting that to the future of design. Keeping the timeless character, but at the same time, achieving and being always current in the field. That is, I think that's very important.
We do have a strong legacy in the way we think. There's no signature style of this firm, so I think it's a little bit of a heavier lift and a more nuanced process to mentor staff in that kind of tradition of design. And so I think that's a big challenge of you know, how do you teach that way of thinking versus, you know, teaching how to have a signature style, which is a more straightforward path for a lot of legacy firms. I think the other big part besides the mentorship is building this New York office, which we have a small studio out here now and hope to keep expanding it and making more connections to the East Coast. The firm's always been connected to the East Coast, mostly with academic work, but also with the arts. And I think our challenge is to kind of keep that up and maybe have a dual kind of equality between offices at some point and have a large office out here too. So that's my personal challenge for the future.
I'm actually have been kind of supporting Joe and kind of thinking about just the overall office structure and how do we really support all the different disciplines, design, thinking about the diversity, thinking about looking at our unique clients, but also really staying true and honored to the start of this practice, which is in the arts related world, you know, not just kind of with the artists, but then also thinking about the patrons, thinking about the museum. So it's kind of all those different connections about how do we further build that community and give that community and that aspect to a broader audience than just the LA community, you know, thinking about the New York community And how do we kind of further expand that beyond just us being this amazing Los Angeles, now New York architecture practice, but bringing our skills and talents to the rest of the global community, maybe even not just America, but thinking about how do we, bring our amazing talents and services to a broader audience, and supporting that aspect. So, which I think all of us are in that boat. It's making sure also getting work is going to be, that always continual challenge. So making sure that, we're staying at that head of the curve, at that edge. We're in an amazing spot right now that technology is really on this hyper track. And that's really, we're really feeling those effects in how we produce our services and how we provide the best service to our clients, using our tools, getting stronger at using the technology to find better efficiencies within the practice, so we can focus more on the design, focus on, getting projects to these tight budgets. So really looking and exploring, where our new opportunities, so we're not kind of back-footed on those elements, but we're part of those initial dialogues and making sure that, FF&P is placed there for the future.
To kind of follow along the line of thinking that Fred started is for 40 years. I mean, I've been here over 35 years now, I believe, and 34 years maybe, and David a couple years longer. And the firm has had a certain kind of output and ethos based on the three original partners. And because we have established a legacy, we believe that the firm kind of as an institution could continue beyond the generation of original partners. And so how, as a group of four, do you work with us to figure out what is the future? How do we blend the individual talents? What is the kind of work we do that might be different? And where the practice of architecture is going, because I feel like it's a moment where it's evolving a little bit. And so how do we curate the talents so that that legacy is adjusted and tweaked, to, God forbid, go another 40 years?
I mean, I think what's been interesting about my position in the design aspect of this practice is that I'm not typically the person that's putting the pen to paper. I'm usually actually putting the word on the paper. And so a lot of my job is thinking about how we express that design ethos. And as Matt mentioned, we don't really have a signature style, but I would say we have a signature ethos. And that has, as difficult as that might actually be to teach to new generations, it's actually a great opportunity to interpret concepts and themes in new and open ways. And so, I was thinking about this as far as, some of the themes that we've talked about in the last, since I've been at the office, that are recurring, that I think are very open-ended, but also really sort of fundamental to our practice. And, I think one of them is practicality. I think this sort of Midwestern leadership has always grounded us in a reality that I think is really powerful. And I think architecture, like a lot of industries, as you were saying, Joe, is evolving, but I think that it needs to be for people, and it needs to be for communities, and it needs to be for the planet. It needs to serve, and it needs to function. And how we take that mandate of practicality and make it beautiful, I think, is a really important lesson for the future. The other thing that I think that maybe Taka and I connect on is this idea that there's this idea of the sensation of experience within space. We take for granted that we spend, 95% of our time indoors. And in our environments, our physical environments really profoundly affect us. And I think that's something that is really interesting to explore from a design perspective and from a psychological perspective. I think we also have this very strong legacy of art integration. Fred is an artist himself, and I think we all really care about the arts, and that's something that's going to be a really interesting way of reinterpreting. I was just having a conversation yesterday about how, for a current client, we can integrate a creative expression of data, which is very, kind of a new and evolving form of artistic expression. And then, I think one of the hallmarks is that, we have our ethos is kind of codified in a little booklet that Fred originally put together and that we've expanded on, called Delight. And I can't imagine anything better than working towards creating spaces and a practice that is grounded in just that notion. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everything we did went back to delight?
Matt, you talk about that, the design and not a signature style. And it's interesting. And Marisa, as you were talking, you reminded me about the ethos and what the design culture came up with. And I actually, at least once a month, which is not a lot, get this out and take a look at what is in there as it relates to a situation of doing something. And I always think how those kind of fundamental principles, which are always there, inform what we do, kind of on a day-to-day basis. And how do those evolve? How do they need to evolve? Taka, you hit on it a little bit, that they've got to change.
It's interesting. I also kind of come back to the book. I mean, the design culture book that Joe is referring to, that we put together over a year ago now, was trying to formalize a lot of the design concepts because there's a lot out there. I think it's built up over the years, but never been really formalized and codified so that a wider audience could understand it. And I think we're at the size now that we felt we needed, staff to kind of understand more of those things more quickly as they come on board. And I think it's really helped people have more access to how the partners and designers think in a firm. And I think the way that we build ideas, I often refer to as a layering. And so I think, as Joe, you're asking about kind of moving into the future, how we evolve. And I think it's almost built into the thinking of the firm, where there's almost always room for new ideas, because I think we often layer ideas in projects. It's not necessarily just one driver. It's we're very client focused, so kind of their influence is always taken as the kind of utmost priority. And we work with great teams and take ideas from a lot of different voices. So I think that's a strength, and it will help us kind of keep evolving as the practice changes and grows.
Delight and design culture book are, in a way, very nicely abstract. Especially Delight is very abstract, which gives us a room to think further. That is our opportunity. Whoever in the design team, everybody in the team, get an opportunity to take that and think further, and that is eventually form the shape of architecture. That is kind of, it doesn't have time to it. It's more probably 10 years later, if you take a look at the Delight, you probably think differently. 20 years later, you probably think differently, kind of blending what is happening to the world at that point, and then still Delight is current, and then Delight itself could be added something more to it. That is a kind of great part of Delight, and a supplementary design culture book. Those things that help us keep being creative, and adding something to next generation and the future.
Nathan, on the way the practice of architecture is evolving, you had mentioned earlier that so I have some operational responsibility in the practice, and that could be seems like an area of your expertise as well. This idea of how we practice is evolving, it partly through technology, it's partly through a more, inclusive world. Is there anything in particular that you see how we need to adapt, or what challenges come out of that?
I do, and actually it combines with the previous question, some of the comments. Just kind of looking at our practice itself, Taka kind of hit on the abstract nature, and I think that's an area where we have been an amazing practice up to this point in terms of just really listening to our clients, understanding them better than they understand themselves. And through that is where we start to find what are the elements that are missing, or what can enrich this experience and process and project. And I think we as a practice, are so good at listening to all our clients that sometimes we aren't good enough in telling our next client how that process works, and being stronger in here's how that does work. Here's how we can take all these pieces and deliver the most amazing project, or the project that meets these specific needs. Because I hate to use this word because it's kind of popular right now, but being a disruptor. I look back at the whole practice, and you really look at Fred's first house, the collage, that was a disruptor day one. So it's kind of these small elements that we bring to the picture that bring that amazing, like, aha, see that space, these delight moments. I was thinking back to some other projects when we first kind of worked at Princeton, Fred introducing the idea of art into that lobby. And then from that initial idea, Princeton completely shifted their idea of art integration through the rest of their buildings. So it's kind of these small disruptor moments, but how do we clearly make sure we clearly, state that in the future, that these are elements that you'll get out of this process. Working with Charles R. Drew University, one of the initial ideas was shutting down a whole street and making a promenade. And just that kernel, is what really drove, that whole client, that whole project to that next level. And even also thinking about, sustainability and bringing it, to the forefront, that it's no longer just this scary element that is expensive that happens later in the project, but thinking about it not as sustainability, but thinking about it as wellness. Thinking about all of these elements and putting, a little different spin on it, and that being the disruption. It doesn't have to be gigantic earth shifting, but our practice has been able to bring these small adjustments, which has really carried us forward. So making sure we don't lose sight of that. And then also just be, like I said, back to your question, Joe, being stronger about what we can provide, what we will be providing, and how that narrative is framed.
Initial reaction, your thoughts on being a partner, what it means to you, what your role is, what you've learned from one another, which I think is, as Joe said, even in this conversation, I've learned some things, which is, to me, what the outcome I was hoping for. And what changes do you imagine? I mean, this is not about freezing something in time, but it's creating a living, organic thing that will be different in the future. And do you have some thoughts to share on that?
I can't remember if the three of you introduced the amazing news, or if it was Fred and Joe, but it was definitely pretty struck by, I would say almost the weight of this amazing opportunity. being part of a partnership to a practice that I've enjoyed for so long, it's just something I wasn't actually even dreaming about. So it's kind of completely shifted my view on the practice and kind of the future, just knowing that I have now a different investment in the practice than just kind of participating on the projects, but really participating now on the overall firm, the health of the firm, the future of the firm was just something, being in my mid-30s, didn't expect, even dream that would kind of happen. This is something, in our industry happens typically later in careers for people. So that was, like I said, I was kind of blown away, over the moon. Had to, I think, take a couple weekends to kind of, deflate a little bit there. So completely honored in knowing I'm now helping drive to the future. As kind of talked about in the last couple of questions, really, I have an interest in really supporting Marisa, Matthew, Taka, in these next steps, thinking about how do we expand the New York presence, how do we further expand our programming aspect. We've done so much for our academic clients that we could really potentially bolster that side of the practice and grow that area. As also Marisa touched upon, how do we reach new communities? We've been deeply rooted in the academics art world, but how do we kind of think about new communities and supporting their goals and their missions? We're starting with Charles R. Drew University and thinking about that part of Los Angeles, but how do we start to further expand what we can contribute, what we can support, and what we can champion towards the future is major goals that I'd like to support the partnership in. And back to another question, I think learning from the three of you, it's really thinking about how does the four of us as the next gen build and strengthen our relationship, our communication, and making sure that we're having fun while we're doing this. It's not just a job, but this is an amazing part of our life and our future.
I appreciate it. Becoming this group, especially I'm still a foreigner. I have a green card, but I'm still a foreigner. And I speak less good English. I remember I spoke with David first time I joined the office, and we had a team meeting, and I didn't follow the conversation. Somebody asked a question to me, and I was answering a totally wrong thing, not related to the conversation. And then I told him, David, I didn't understand what a conversation was most of the time in the meeting. David said, yeah, I knew it. I knew it. You're not understanding the conversation. So even that situation, I have been in this office now maybe more than 12 years, and yeah, making me to be a family of FF&P, and eventually became a group of leadership. I really appreciate inclusiveness office provided to me. And in one of the retreat, I don't remember what was the question, but a great thing about the office, I asked and I answered the balance between Fred, David, and Joe. The three partners balance is making this office great. That's what I answered. And now I feel like Next Gen for us has the same thing, great balance, and then different talents, actually, very different to each other. Even Matt and I are very different, also both really focus on design, but very different for us, and supporting each other and respecting each other, having different, learning each other, teaching each other. I think that's a great thing about this whole Next Gen Partners, and I'm confident it's gonna be getting even further greater in the future.
Definitely repeat a lot of those sentiments. I mean, I think I was as shocked as everyone else when the announcement was made. It wasn't really something we had any insight into the thinking on before it happened, that we were selected, and it really was a shift in thinking of, oh wow, this is a legacy firm now, and we have to learn how to run it. I think one of the good points Taka made is how different the three founding partners are and how they complement each other. But I would say they really, as we pay attention to how they run the firm, I think they're equally committed and have shown us how much of a commitment and grit and determination it takes on a daily basis to kind of do what they do. And so I think that's definitely something we've learned by being closer to their daily lives and their process, is how much effort they put in and how much you really have to, as an architect, to design great buildings, serve your clients. So,
I think when we found out about the next generation partnership decision, I was actually at a point in my career where I was starting to think about, am I going to be able to have a long-term place in this office, mostly just because my focus is so specialized. Like I kind of thought like, well, maybe I need to go join a strategy firm or even, open my own consultancy. And, all of those things sounded nice, but, I really was not looking forward to having to not work with the kind of clients that we normally work with at the office. And I was just thinking, how am I going to get to that place? So, in my own kind of off on my own. And so when I found out, I was so happy to be able to kind of continue doing what I do in service of the kinds of projects and project types and people that we consistently have worked with over the years. So that was very exciting. Of course, I was also extremely stunned, no question. I think, as everyone has touched on, the interpersonal dynamic between the three senior partners and the four of us has always been a real interesting lesson in complementary skills and talents and personalities as well. As far as Taka and Matt and Nathan go, it's true, we are all extremely different. And I think that as a collective, we make a really interesting leader. Taka and I actually sat in on a leadership seminar fairly shortly after we found out about the partnership. And they talked about the idea of 20th versus 21st century leadership. And they liken 20th century leadership to Superman. All about superheroes today, but the sort of single person, well, single man, let's be real, who knew everything, did everything, was everything. And that 21st century leadership was much more of a network. And that's really what I think is happening with us. I think we all have tremendous personal and professional respect for who we are, how we think, what we do. Bring lots of different strengths to the table. Matt's kind of meticulous ability to go from the big picture to the small detail of design to reality is something that I admire tremendously. Nathan and I think, see eye to eye on making plans and getting organized and getting things done and being kind of the office motivators, not just in terms of furthering the practice, but furthering the culture. I always kind of describe myself as the resident butt kicker, but I hopefully also do it with a little bit of empathy too. And then, for Taka, we have really great walks to coffee almost every day when we're working together. And we talk about such interesting ideas related to design, but also culture and big abstract ideas. And so, you know, that intellectual connection I think that you and I have is really special. So I think the blend of this has been so interesting. And I look forward to the future of working with all of you. I think it's going to be really fun, and I think it's going to be really interesting.
I heard that the word fun mentioned a few times, which is I've always thought was the maybe underappreciated but essential bit of chemistry in any relationship. And this is, I've always thought that architecture is primarily about relationships. It's about the relationships that you can form with your clients, and it's about the relationships you form with your colleagues. And I think was one of the things that I didn't overtly think, but I felt it between David and Joe, is they are people, and they are outstanding at forming and strengthening relationships, and they've established wonderful relationships over the years. And I think that you all have that as well. And I would only say that that's a critical thing. And humor, what we do is not easy. There's a lot of pressure. The stakes are high. Things don't always go perfectly. And yet I've always appreciated that, in particular, David and Joe had that ability to make me lighten up when I get too uptight and stressed about things. And I think the same thing with the clients, being able to make the clients feel at ease with that, you know, humor. You know, we're people, we understand each other. This is hard. It's not perfect. It's not always pretty. But let's enjoy ourselves. This is a big part of our life. And let's be a group of people that people enjoy working with. And that will attract and solidify these relationships. And I think that's proven to be, you know, an important part of our chemistry that we offer, and that we enjoy with each other.
I do a lot of the residential work, and some of the clients that hire us are elderly. And one of the questions I always ask them is, how have you done it? How have you been together for 40 years? And it's amazing. The answer is always usually the same thing. And the couples say, we never go to bed mad at each other. We will not go to sleep until we communicate and talk. And I think it's a wonderful thing that that's part of communication is in a way, you know, letting someone know if you're upset with them, and just being honest with another is really important. And I think another thing to keep in mind is walk in each other's shoes. It's you know, we can often get wrapped up into ourselves and not even try to understand the other person's point of view. So that I think is essential to a successful business. And certainly laughter is part of that. So I guess a question I have for everyone is, we have a type of work that we do, and I'm curious, and the founding principles of that type of work came from Fred and Joe and myself. And I'm wondering if any of you feel there's something missing. You know, is there a desire that you personally have that you wish the firm could pursue? And so that has a lot to do with the future. But is there anything missing in our practice that you personally feel you would like to be doing?
Well, I think one thing that we've dabbled in it, but I would love to see us explore more, is work more internationally. I know that we have certainly a local focus, and I think, you know, in a very understated way, we also have a tremendous domestic focus. But I think, you know, there's so much amazing architecture happening out in the world, and I think there's a lot to learn from other cultures and other countries, and I would love the opportunity to explore that.
I'd like to strengthen more what we are doing, especially for museum cultural portion. Nathan and I are working on museum projects together long time, and we are a little bit worked on foreign countries in the last year, and like Marisa said, I'm interested in expanding that to more internationally, especially where I'm from. If we could design a building where I'm from, that would be fun. I'm really hoping someday that to happen. That's my dream.
I would say I really love the mix of what we're doing now. Maybe it's because we're so strong in the arts still right now, and our academic clients are always really wonderful to work with, and even teaching us. So I think the arts academic work is great. Personally, I think I miss the smaller scale too. I haven't done too much residential recently, so I think getting into some homes on the East Coast again could be nice as well. But overall, I mean, I think, the other aspect I always enjoy is adaptive reuse, and we haven't done too much of that recently. So not a client type, but a project type. I think we're really good at thinking through adaptive reuse, and we have a new opportunity to do that at Princeton in a way. So yeah, I think the mix is really aligned with what I think we're good at.
Personally, I'd like us to strengthen up our sense of scale. And when I say scale, as you know, we're kind of good in the middle zone on the building side of things, exhibition side of things, but we always seem to kind of dabble through some different clients, or we at least talk internally in the office. And when I say scale, I talk about kind of the larger, the campus plan, the master plan, thinking of more than just the building itself, but thinking about the building, the environments, the community, and that part of the scale. And then the other end of the spectrum, we always kind of dabble in talking about, well, why aren't we designing, that door handle, or why aren't we designing, that window or that piece of furniture? That we kind of go back to our kit of parts in terms of those products. But I know this whole group definitely has an opinion about the items we touch or that we sit on or, look through, that thinking about, is there an area that we can further develop on that side of things? So it's no longer just about buildings, but it's also the environments themselves and, what you're engaging. So we do have a history on the master planning side throughout the years of this practice, but it's never truly been actively sought after. So that's what I'd like to see this practice reinvestigate, rethink about those opportunities and where we can fit in.
I have another question. It's different. We spend a fair amount of time with our clients thinking about collaboration and how they work together, and we design buildings around that or workspaces around that. And we have a very special physical environment, both in New York. Matt, when I look at your image and I see the office in the background, and it just like says, New York loft office. It's so clean and special. And then here in Los Angeles, we work in I think one of the better buildings in all of the city in terms of its scale and its domesticity, et cetera. But to some degree, it reflects the past in a number of different ways. And I wonder, and I've talked about this before with some of you individually, do you imagine a way that we would change our physical environment that might reflect the collaborative, some of the principles that we talk about in our work, changing the physical manifestation of the environment, God forbid, what's going on today? and how that might impact the practice?
Well, as you said, Joe, I think we're having this conversation during the time of a global pandemic, and obviously we're all in our respective environments. Most of us are working at home right now. And I think that that has been something that we have talked about a lot in the last couple of years, even before the pandemic hit. I think that one of the things that we struggle with, at least in Los Angeles, is that as Los Angeles becomes ever more sprawling, ever more dense, ever more traffic heavy city, it becomes a very segregated place of sort of isolated neighborhoods. And we have this beautiful building that we work in, but it is sometimes limiting physically because we are wrestling with its history, and we need to respect that history, but sometimes that history fights with contemporary architectural practice. We are wrestling with certain realities about who can and who wants to come and work in that building on the west side of Los Angeles, and in an area that's fairly affluent, that sort of changes the socioeconomic dynamic of our employee population. And also, in terms of just the way people are increasingly prioritizing their personal lives and trying to strike that balance between working and living, remote work is I think something that we were all forced recently to jump into, and some of us were more reluctant or eager than others. I think it's been very interesting to see how ultimately I think it's been fairly successful. I think we all miss each other, and we miss that ability to kind of just get a crew together and have that quick design charrette on the wall. But at the same time, in certain ways, it has been quite liberating. And I think it's here to stay. It would be hard to put that genie back in the bottle in a complete capacity. So what does that mean for what our office, less about the physical environment, but like what does its physicality actually serve for us? Is it the place where we all come together periodically? Is it the place where we start to expand and welcome a community for events in the future, so that we can then kind of go back to our home environments and work in a more focused way? That to me is going to be a really interesting shift. The change from always being together, always collaborating in a physical, in-person way, and how do we now integrate the virtual component of that?
Marisa hit on all pretty amazing points. Thankfully, our industry was pretty well set up to be able to shift to an at-work environment. We had already been moving. A majority of our digital design tools are cloud-based, based on just subscriptions. So thankfully, that was an easy transition for the staff to be able to work in a different location, but still be able to collaborate with the team. I think the bigger question is really what is going to happen with the technology, what technologies are going to develop for the collaboration. As we've talked about to a lot of people about what's amazing about our space is it has the open studio environment. So you have that ability to just listen to anybody's conversation, learn through basically osmosis, have the ability to, quickly walk over, chat with David, as Joe, you've always mentioned, just the corridor between your space and Fred's space, the major decisions of this practice happened, in those kind of public ancillary spaces. So it's really going to be figuring out, as even Fred says, the third space. So how do we develop or create those types of spaces? They're already here in this building, but how do we expand that now into this at-home environments? Marisa, you bring up a really interesting idea about the physical plant. Maybe it's not used for just working, that it's used as this kind of community gathering space, that you're bringing in more than just architects into the space, more than just artists, that you know, there could be alternate uses for the space, but you still respect, you know, its history. It was set up with amazing gardens, this connection to the outside. So you already have kind of those kind of safer spaces in that way. So, but with the state of the world, I think, you know, the bubble has been broken for a lot of companies, a lot of industries, that working somewhere else, working remotely, not being at a physical location where everybody's at is okay. You know, we can make this work. It's working successfully, which, you know, I think has a great impact to the health and welfare of ourselves, our staff, and everybody else in the community. So it's really going to be about how do we look at alternate uses as we kind of think about the future.
I was just going to add, I think interestingly, the LA office is fairly well suited to the kind of some of the qualities you need. I mean, there's different ways to look at it, but all the gardens, getting cross ventilation, it's really helpful. We're kind of in separate zones, so there's a lot of space in the office where you can go for individual kind of meetings. So in New York, we have two full walls of window that we get great cross ventilation here when it's when the weather's good like it is right now. So I think, yeah, I think the need for physical space is definitely still there, and I don't think it's going to shrink at all. I think we'll always want at least as much space to come together with. We just can't pack it as much as we did previously.
So right now I'm at home, but maybe 70% of the time I go office. I get more focused, and I personally, and I enjoy working there. With the book there, I can reference library books and large, strong computer and monitor. But having the flexibility, like joining the meeting from home like this, is also a great thing. And then the design process with the team in the current project is working much better than I imagined, with people working remotely. That's been my experience.
Well, whether or not this is for the record, I just have enjoyed this very much, and it's only continues to strengthen my belief in these relationships and the people that we have that we're working with. And it's I love learning new little bits and pieces about people, and if this process is what it takes, so be it. But you know, we need to continue to cultivate that chemistry. And I love to learn. I learned things this morning, and relationships mean everything, and this has been a great part of it. And I found myself sketching part of the office to see, like, how could we make the office work a little bit differently? Maybe that whole East End with what's now, you know, Quincy Jones' old office, the conference room, and the kitchen is like you know, becomes a social space. And you know, I think that one of the things that intrigues me is, as makers of social space, we need to continue to think about our own social space and how that affects us, and be open to change. I know there has been from some people sentiment that that the office is a monument and a historic artifact that can't be changed. I don't believe in that, and I think that you know, it's a laboratory that we can use for ourselves as well as our clients.
I agree. I've mentioned the same thing a number of times about our, you know, Fred and my offices something of the past. And should the walls be opened up and they become more community collective spaces?
We take a minute or an hour and a half to stop what we're doing and stop being so busy and actually just talk to each other. It's always such a pleasure. And especially in the last few months, we haven't had a lot of opportunity to do that. I miss you all. I look forward to the day where I can give you all a hug again. But in the meantime, it's good to see you and good to hear from you and good to learn from you always.
Thanks, Marisa.
See you soon.